Blood filled my mouth before I even realized Derek had hit me. I slammed sideways into the kitchen cabinets, dishes rattling above my head as a sharp crack echoed through my jaw. I tried to close my mouth, but something felt horribly wrong. My teeth wouldn't line up anymore. "Derek," I tried to say. It came out as a wet, broken sound. His face changed instantly. The anger that had driven him forward vanished, replaced by panic. "Maya, I didn't mean." My hands were already fumbling for my phone on the floor. I didn't think about him. I didn't think about my parents. I only knew I needed help. The emergency number appeared on the screen, and my thumb hit call. "Dad," Derek whispered. Before the phone even reached my ear, my father's hand ripped it out of my grip. "No," I lunged toward him, but another burst of pain exploded through my face. He stepped backward, clutching my phone against his chest. "Don't destroy his future," he said. I stared at him. Blood dripped from my chin onto my shirt. I pointed at my jaw, unable to form words. My mother didn't even look at my face. Instead, she folded her arms. "Stop playing the victim," she snapped. "Your brother made one mistake. Don't turn this into something that ruins his entire life." Derek stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen. Not one person came toward me. Not one person asked if I was okay. The only thing anyone seemed afraid of was what might happen to Derek if I told the truth. I pressed both hands against my jaw, trying to hold it still as another wave of pain rolled through me. Every heartbeat seemed to drive the broken bone deeper into my face. The argument had started over something so ordinary, it already felt unreal. Our parents had invited both of us over for Sunday dinner. Derek had arrived late, irritated before he even walked through the door. He'd been talking nonstop about the law enforcement academy that had finally accepted him after years of trying. Dad couldn't stop bragging. "My son's finally going to wear a badge." Mom smiled proudly. "We've always known he'd make something of himself." I congratulated him. I genuinely meant it. Then Derek casually joked that I'd probably never understand what real pressure looked like, because I just played with children all day. I laughed awkwardly. "I don't play with children," I said. "I'm a pediatric occupational therapist." Dad waved a hand. You know what he meant. Normally, I would have let it go. I'd spent my whole life letting things go. But something inside me finally refused. I've worked hard for my career too. The room went quiet. Derek leaned back in his chair. "So now you're comparing yourself to me." "No. I think you are. I just said my work matters too." His expression darkened. "It matters to you." The next few seconds happened too fast to stop. He stood. I stood. He stepped closer. I told him to back away. Instead, his fist crashed into the left side of my face. Now my father still held my phone, as though it belonged to him. "I'm calling an ambulance," I tried to say. It came out as little more than broken syllables. Dad shook his head. "We'll drive you ourselves." I reached for the phone again. He pulled it farther away. "No police." Mom stepped between us. "Families don't do this to each other." I looked from one face to another. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes. My father was protecting the man who had fractured my jaw. My mother was protecting the story she wanted the world to believe. Nobody was protecting me. I grabbed my purse with shaking hands and headed toward the front door. Dad moved first. He planted himself in front of it. "You're not leaving until everyone calms down." I looked down. Drops of blood were landing on the hardwood floor between us. Behind my father, Derek whispered, "Dad." But Dad never took his eyes off me. "If you can't call for help," I thought, staring at the phone still clenched in his hand, "then how is anyone ever going to know what really happened?" The cool evening air hit my face the moment my father finally stepped away from the front door. He hadn't suddenly changed his mind. I'd simply waited until he turned toward Derek for a split second, then slipped around him before anyone could stop me. "Maya," my mother shouted behind me. I didn't look back. Every step sent a jolt of pain through my jaw. I pressed one hand against the side of my face and walked as fast as I could down the sidewalk, fighting the dizziness that threatened to pull me to the ground. My purse was still over my shoulder. My phone wasn't. Dad still had it. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone. A car slowed beside me. The driver rolled down the window. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I tried to answer. Nothing understandable came out. His expression immediately changed. "Oh my God." He reached for his own phone. "Hang on, I'm calling an ambulance." I wanted to tell him thank you. Instead, I could only nod as tears mixed with the blood running down my chin. As we waited for the ambulance, memories kept crashing into me almost as hard as Derek's punch. This wasn't the first time he'd hurt me. It was simply the first time the damage couldn't be hidden. When we were children, Derek shoved me off my bicycle because I'd beaten him in a neighborhood race. Dad called it boys being competitive. When Derek broke my science project the night before the regional competition, Mom told me to stop making him feel guilty because he already feels bad. He didn't. He laughed about it the next day. In high school, he dented my first car after borrowing it without permission. Dad paid for the repairs, then told me to apologize because Derek was already stressed from football. Somehow, every disaster ended with me comforting the person who caused it. Eventually, I stopped expecting fairness. Keeping the peace became easier than fighting battles. I was never allowed to win. The ambulance arrived within minutes. 2 paramedics rushed over. One look at my face was enough. "Can you tell us your name?" I carefully nodded and pulled a small notebook from my purse. My hands shook as I wrote. "Maya Carter." One paramedic knelt beside me. "Can you tell us what happened?" I froze. My father's words echoed inside my head. Don't destroy his future. For years, I'd been trained to protect Derek. To stay quiet. To forgive. To move on. The pen hovered above the page. Then I slowly wrote 2 words. "My brother." The paramedic's eyes met mine. He didn't interrupt. He simply handed me another sheet of paper. I kept writing. At the emergency department, everything moved quickly. A trauma physician examined my face before gently asking me not to try speaking anymore. "We're going to take good care of you." I nodded. Within minutes, I was being wheeled toward imaging. The CT scan didn't take long. Waiting for the results felt endless. Finally, the physician returned carrying the scans. He placed them on the screen. "I know this is difficult," he said softly, "but your jaw has multiple fractures." The words settled over the room. "Surgery will be necessary to repair it." I closed my eyes. The injury was even worse than I'd feared. The physician pointed carefully at the images. "These fractures are consistent with significant blunt force trauma." He paused before looking directly at me. "This doesn't look like someone simply falling into a cabinet." I opened my eyes. He wasn't accusing me. He was giving me permission to tell the truth. A nurse pulled a chair beside my bed and placed another writing pad in front of me. "You don't have to say anything out loud," she said gently. "You can write whatever you're comfortable sharing." I looked down at the blank page, then back at the doctor. He spoke calmly, but his next sentence changed everything. "We're required to document exactly how this happened." The nurse barely finished speaking before another member of the trauma team entered Maya's room with a clipboard. "We've contacted the on-call social worker," she said quietly to the physician. "Given the nature of the injuries, the protocol has already started." Maya looked from one face to another. She hadn't asked anyone to report what happened. The hospital had begun acting on its own. For the first time since Derek's punch, events were moving in a direction her parents couldn't control. About 20 minutes later, while nurses prepared her for surgery, voices echoed down the hallway. "Maya," her mother called. "I need to see my daughter." Her father appeared moments later, his face tense but composed enough to look convincing. "There must be some misunderstanding," he told the receptionist. "It was a family argument, that's all." Derek followed several steps behind them. He looked pale. He never once looked toward Maya's room. The charge nurse intercepted them outside the treatment area. "I'm sorry, but only one visitor at a time." Dad forced a polite smile. "I just need to explain what happened." The nurse didn't move. "The patient will explain when she's ready." Mom folded her arms. "My daughter has always been dramatic." The words reached Maya through the partially open door. "She exaggerates everything." Dad nodded in agreement. "She's upset. She doesn't always think clearly when emotions are high." Maya closed her eyes. Even here, even surrounded by doctors, they were still trying to rewrite reality. The social worker introduced herself before sitting beside Maya's bed. She spoke softly. "I'm here for you, not for your family." Maya nodded. The social worker slid a notebook toward her. "I understand speaking is painful." Maya picked up the pen. Her hand trembled. The first sentence came slowly. "My brother punched me." The social worker waited. No interruptions. No judgment. Maya continued writing. She described the argument. The punch. Trying to call emergency services. Her father taking her phone. His exact words. Asterisk don't destroy his future. Then she wrote what hurt almost as much as the fracture. "My mother said I was playing the victim." The social worker quietly read every word before looking back at Maya. "Thank you for telling me." It was the first time anyone in her family had ever thanked her for telling the truth. Outside the room, voices suddenly grew louder. Dad had realized what was happening. "You can't take one side of the story," he argued. "I'm her father." The physician stepped into the hallway. "We're documenting medical findings. This is a private family matter." "No," the physician replied evenly. "This is a patient with serious injuries." Mom tried another approach. "She's emotional. She'll regret saying these things." The physician didn't raise his voice. "Our responsibility is to our patient." Dad's confidence visibly cracked. For the first time, he understood that hospital records couldn't simply disappear because he wanted them to. A nurse returned to Maya's bedside, carrying another form. "There is something you should know." Maya looked up. "The emergency responders who transported you received an automatic alert before anyone at the hospital spoke with us." Maya frowned. She slowly wrote. "Who called?" The nurse shook her head. "We're still confirming that." Maya stared at the page. She hadn't had her phone. Her father had taken it before she could complete the call. No neighbor had come with her. No relative even knew where she was. Then, who had alerted emergency services? Outside the room, her parents exchanged confused looks. Clearly, they didn't know either. A hospital security officer approached the waiting area. "I'm going to have to ask the three of you to leave for now." Dad looked stunned. "I have every right to stay." "You've repeatedly interrupted patient interviews." Mom stepped forward. "She's our daughter. And she's our patient." Neither parent had an answer for that. Derek finally lifted his head. For a brief second, his eyes met Maya's through the doorway. She saw something she'd never seen in him before. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear. Security escorted all three of them toward the elevators. As the doors closed, the hallway became silent. For the first time in her life, Maya was completely beyond her family's reach. A few minutes later, Another man wearing an investigator's identification badge walked into her room carrying a thick folder. He placed it on the table beside her bed. Then he looked directly at Maya. "We've already received additional evidence." The investigator's words hung in the room. "We've already received additional evidence." Maya looked at him in confusion. She reached for the notepad beside her bed and quickly wrote, "What evidence?" He glanced at the page before gently shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. I can't discuss specifics until we've completed the formal interviews." He closed the folder without opening it. "I know that's frustrating." It was. Maya had spent the last several hours believing everything depended on a phone she no longer had. Now someone was telling her there was evidence she didn't even know existed. After the investigator left, Maya lay quietly in the hospital bed while nurses continued preparing her for surgery. She replayed the argument over and over. The shouting. The punch. Her father grabbing the phone. Every detail seemed painfully clear. Then another memory surfaced. Not from that evening. From months earlier. Her hospital had hosted a workplace safety seminar after several staff members experienced violent incidents with patients' family members. One presenter had encouraged everyone to activate emergency features on their smart devices. If you're ever knocked unconscious or experience a severe impact, the instructor had explained, your watch can automatically contact emergency services if you don't respond. Maya had enabled the feature that same afternoon. She hadn't thought about it since. Her eyes widened. She slowly lifted her wrist. The smartwatch was gone. The nurses had removed it before imaging. She wrote another question on her pad. "Where is my watch?" A nurse smiled reassuringly. "It's secured with your personal belongings." Maya stared toward the cabinet across the room. Could that really be what the investigator meant? Across town, Derek wasn't sleeping. He sat at his apartment kitchen table while his parents argued in low voices nearby. Dad rubbed both hands across his face. "They don't have anything." "They have her statement," Mom replied. "That's not enough." Derek finally spoke. "What if the hospital believes her?" Dad answered immediately. "They can't prove what happened inside the house." The confidence in his voice sounded forced. A knock interrupted the conversation. Dad opened the door. An investigator stood outside. "We're requesting permission to inspect the residence and preserve potential evidence related to the reported assault." Nobody spoke. The investigator handed Dad an official document. "You'll also receive formal requests regarding any digital devices connected to the incident." Dad's expression changed. "Digital devices?" The investigator simply nodded. "We're collecting all available records." As the investigator walked away, Derek felt his stomach tighten. He suddenly remembered the smartwatch on Maya's wrist. Back at the hospital, the investigator returned. The radiologist completed the final report. He placed copies into the file. "The fracture pattern is entirely consistent with the mechanism described in your written statement." Maya nodded slowly. The evidence wasn't depending on memory anymore. It was becoming measurable, objective, permanent. The following morning, another investigator entered carrying several printed photographs. He placed one carefully in front of Maya. It showed her stumbling away from her parents' house. Blood stained the front of her shirt. Her left hand pressed against her jaw. A timestamp glowed in the corner. Another photograph showed her father several steps behind her. Her phone was clearly visible in his hand. Maya looked up in disbelief. The investigator explained quietly. A neighbor's exterior security camera captured the sidewalk. He placed another document beside it. "The timestamps match your arrival at the hospital. Every piece fit together. The medical scans. The photographs. The timeline. None of it relied on anyone's opinion. Later that afternoon, Derek received another call from his attorney. His voice sounded very different this time. "They've requested records from your sister's smartwatch." Derek felt the room spin. "What does that mean?" "It means, if the device captured anything, we need to prepare for that possibility." His father tried to interrupt. "It was just an argument." The attorney didn't respond immediately. Finally, he said, "At this point, it's no longer just about what anyone remembers." The call ended. Silence filled the room. For the first time, no one talked about protecting Derek's future. They were too busy wondering what the evidence already knew. At that exact moment, inside the hospital, an investigator's phone vibrated. He looked down at the screen, read the notification, and immediately stood. He turned toward Maya. "The forensic team has finished recovering the emergency recording from your smartwatch." The investigator set the recovered smartwatch on the table beside Maya's hospital bed. "It took a little time to extract everything," he said, "but the emergency recording is intact." Maya looked at the small device. Only the day before, she'd believed it was nothing more than a watch. Now it had become the one witness nobody in her family had considered. The investigator opened the file. The impact triggered the emergency detection feature. When no response was received, it began recording automatically while sending an emergency alert with your location. Maya closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered enabling the feature during the hospital safety seminar. She had almost forgotten it existed. The investigator continued. "The timeline matches the ambulance dispatch, the neighbor's security footage, and the medical records." Every piece was beginning to fit together. Several days later, detectives conducted formal interviews. This time, the evidence spoke before anyone else did. The recording captured the argument escalating. It captured the sound of the punch. It captured Maya gasping in pain. Then it captured her trying to call for help. Most importantly, it recorded her father's unmistakable voice. "Don't destroy his future." Seconds later came her mother's voice. "Stop playing the victim." Neither sentence could be explained away. Neither sentence depended on memory. Both were preserved exactly as they had been spoken. The detectives compared the audio with the hospital records, the CT scan, the emergency dispatch timeline, and the security footage showing Maya leaving the house while her father carried her phone. Every independent source supported the same sequence of events. There were no contradictions, only confirmation. When detectives interviewed Derek again, his confidence disappeared. At first, he insisted he'd only pushed his sister. Then he claimed she had fallen. When investigators explained the medical findings and the recovered recording, he stopped talking. His attorney quietly advised him not to answer any more questions. Across the interview room, Derek lowered his head into his hands. For the first time in his life, no one could rescue him from the consequences of his own actions. Not his parents. Not excuses. Not family loyalty. Facts had replaced all of them. The investigation also focused on what happened after the assault. Detectives documented that Maya's father had taken her phone while she was attempting to contact emergency services. Hospital staff provided statements describing both parents repeatedly attempting to interrupt interviews and minimize Maya's injuries. None of those actions erased the assault. Instead, they became part of the documented records surrounding it. Word spread through the extended family faster than Maya expected. At first, several relatives repeated the same story her parents had told them. It was just a misunderstanding. Then investigators released verified information through the proper legal process. Relatives who had doubted Maya began calling her one after another. Some apologized through tears. Others admitted they had spent years believing Derek could do no wrong because that was the story they had always been told. Maya listened politely. She accepted sincere apologies. But she no longer felt responsible for repairing relationships she hadn't broken. A few weeks later, Derek received official notice that he had been removed from consideration for the Law Enforcement Academy. The decision wasn't based on rumor. It followed the documented assault and the criminal case that resulted from it. The future everyone had begged Maya to protect had been destroyed by one person's decision. Derek's, not hers. Her parents struggled with the fallout. Friends who had admired them began keeping their distance after learning what had actually happened. Conversations stopped. Invitations disappeared. The image they had spent years protecting collapsed under the weight of verified evidence. For the first time, they couldn't blame Maya. The truth had come from medical records, investigators, recordings, and witnesses, not from anger or revenge. Maya's own life slowly moved forward. Recovery wasn't quick. Her jaw remained wired for weeks. Physical therapy followed. Speaking normally took time. Eating without pain took even longer. But every milestone reminded her she was healing in more ways than one. Friends from the hospital visited often. Her coworkers covered shifts until she was ready to return. When she finally walked back into the pediatric therapy unit, the children greeted her with handmade cards and careful hugs. One little patient smiled and held up a drawing. "We missed you." Maya smiled behind healing scars. "So did I." Those simple words meant more than she could explain. She eventually moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't large. It wasn't luxurious. But it was peaceful. For the first time in years, silence no longer meant fear. It meant safety. Relatives occasionally called asking whether she was ready to reconcile. "Life's too short," one aunt said. Maya answered gently, "I hope everyone finds peace." Then she added something she had only recently learned herself. Forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. She wished them well. She ended the call. And she kept moving forward. Months later, Maya stood outside the courthouse after one final hearing. She reached into her bag and found the same smartwatch. The screen had long since been repaired. She fastened it around her wrist. Not because it had won her case. Because it reminded her of something far more important. The moment her father ripped away her phone, he believed he had taken away her voice. He never realized the truth had already found another way to speak.